1990s Nickelodeon. Whenever I think about those shows, I have to be honest, I do tend to get nostalgic. Or at least I used to. Because see, in my case, I am a 90s kid. But that means that I was born in the early 90s. So most of the shows that Nickelodeon was dropping, I mean, yeah, I kind of remember it, but it's a distant memory. Like, I'm very young. You know, when you're 5, 6, 7 years old, you're not really paying attention to what you're seeing. And Paramount Plus, which has been pushing their streaming platform, they gave a $2.99 deal, so I was like, all right, I'll drop in. And when I dropped in, I started rewatching some of these shows. I mean, not just from the 90s, but even the 2000s. And what it reminded me that I had no idea what I was actually watching. Now, at this time in my life, I am in my 30s. I am a parent. I have children. And I think critically about what they are actually watching. Like, what is the message behind the show? Television is written by adults. These are screenplays. Like, real adults, not children, come up with these shows. And Nickelodeon really took off in the 90s. I think that's safe to say. All the evidence, if you're talking about, you know, even Nickelodeon Studios, Universal Studios, you know, in Orlando, Florida, like the way they put their base there. I mean, all the shows that we remember, you know, your Kenan and Kel's, Rugrats, yeah, all of that is 90s Nickelodeon. So what I'm going to get into in this video, because I think you deserve to know the truth, is as I've been studying up on these shows and watching the journey, like seeing how this all played out. Remember when I said we didn't really know what we were watching? Well, yeah, we were missing a whole lot. There are so many hidden messages. I mean, I guess not so hidden messages because they were kind of out in the open. We were kids, so we didn't notice. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say this part. Our parents did not know what we were watching either. That's why they let us see it. Now, full disclosure, as I go through this video, I'm going to do this from the only perspective that I know how. I am a man who is a Christian. That is my faith. So when I look back at these shows and, you know, figure out, you know, what was actually happening, that is the lens by which I'm going to view it. But you deserve to know the truth. But I can't get into 1990s Nickelodeon and breaking down the top 10 to 15 shows, because that's what I'm going to do. The ones that were the most watched. Like, if it wasn't in that most watched category, at least compared to, like, what IMDb had to tell us, I ain't going to focus on it. No shade, just being honest. But you can't really understand 1990s Nickelodeon if you don't know exactly what happened before it. Now, some of this is info I got from the documentary The Orange Years, so, you know, you can look it up if you want to. Long story short, if you go back to the 80s, Nickelodeon had a show that ran for about a decade. The name of the show, because I don't remember this because I'm born in the 90s. The show was called You Can't Do That on Television. I don't know a whole lot about the show, but what it was doing was they were trying to push the envelope in what you could do in children's media. The reason they wanted to do it is because they did focus groups. And again, this is what the Orange Years are telling us. They wanted to make TV that the kids wanted to watch. But to clarify, they were also pushing back on television that was, I guess what you would call what your parents wanted you to watch. In other words, shows that actually had, you know, values and morals and things that aligned with what parents wanted to see their kids grow up and move towards. Just give the kids what they want. Now, because I'm a parent of young children, if I ask my sons, what do you want to eat for dinner? They're probably going to respond back with pizza. Or worse, they'll say, we want cake. So if you just give them what they want, that's what we're going to end up on. And yeah, we could give you cake and give it to you again. But long term, how's this going to play out for us? But Nickelodeon figured out that kids want cake, kids want cookies, and they might even accept pizza. And that's what they fed them over and over again. So when you come out of the 80s, you know, you can't do that on television. Remember, I ain't really watch it, but that's the name of it. You can dig into it for yourself if you want. That brings us to the year 1990, where Nickelodeon did something wild. The first show that they really kicked off hard on was a show called Are You Afraid of the Dark? I'm not making this up. When they came up with the idea, the focus groups they did told them that children want to watch, you know, or children like horror shows or really like scary stories, all of that, like around the campfire. That was the concept. And they knew that this is what the focus groups told them the kids liked. But they also knew that parents really weren't down with the idea of a TV show that's goal was to scare their children. Again, I'm not making this up. This is what the adults said themselves. So they go out and make the show, and they come up with all these different, you know, parameters to try to, you know, make it educational while it's still a horror show. Because that's what it is. They didn't get a lot of backlash from parents. And that was basically what it taught Nickelodeon, what it taught the execs was, like I said before, parents really don't know what their children are watching. I mean, they took, you know, some, you know, stories that came from novels and so on. Some of them might have came from short stories and kind of, you know, blew them up and kind of put them in the shows to make it educational. But fundamentally, it's a horror show for children designed to scare the kids. That's all they're trying to do. So, again, somebody like me, growing up in a Christian home, that is obviously not something my parents co-signed. Now, I didn't watch Are You Afraid of the Dark? Like, I just didn't watch that show. But it opened the doorway, because I'm going to get into the next show, but you got to understand that if you remember the words Snick, S-N-I-C-K, because I remember Snick, like I remember even watching it a little bit. Remember, I'm a 90s kid. Snick, which ran all the way through to 2005, but it dropped in 1992. So I'm skipping ahead a little bit. And when Snick drops, it's basically, to me, Are You Afraid of the Dark? Like the concept that they took away from it, like the parents don't know what we're watching. That's what launches Snick. Because Snick was basically for kids who, again, this is what the exec said. They were aiming for children who were too young to go out and party on a Saturday, but they were too old to go to sleep early. And the parents were basically going to be off doing something, so the kid is just sitting with the TV. So you just put on programs that the kid wants to watch. Again, give the kid candy, give the kid cake, you might even give him a little bit of pizza. But we ain't gonna give him anything that's good for him. See where I'm going with this? But if you're new here, I want to say thank you for even making it this far into the video. I'm Ezra Garnett, and if you really want to know the truth about the hidden messages behind nostalgic TV, then you are in the right place. And if anything that I say actually connects with you, it is always greatly appreciated if you would please like and subscribe. But if I don't, just let me know in the comment section, because I try to read them all. So if we're just following the timeline, the next show that I gotta give you is Clarissa Explains It All. Now, that's another show that I watched a little bit. When I say a little bit, I mean a little bit. But it had a female lead, which is not something that we really got a whole lot of in television at that moment. You go back to shows like The Wonder Years and so on, like you have boys in the center, and then you also have shows like Full House, which that drops in like 1987. But you have adults, specifically, male adults, if you're not counting Aunt Becky later on in the seasons, like you had Full House as a family show. Like we were in a window of TV heading into the 90s where family TV was normal. But remember, Nickelodeon figured out the parents don't know what the kids are watching, and that's how they're aiming the shows. So Clarissa Explains It All runs for several seasons. It's pretty successful. It's celebrated for having a female lead. She has her crushes and, everything going on in the school and drama. She has her friends, yeah, that's all fine. But what you kind of have to focus on is Clarissa Explains It All is groundbreaking, one, because of the female lead, but the other thing is it pushes the needle a little bit on neutralizing parents. Because the actor who plays the father in Clarissa Explains It All, he's on record. And when he's on record, what he's saying is he was frustrated for a while that he didn't really get to kind of really act. Like he's in the show, but he's a prop for Clarissa's life. This is not even like Boy Meets World, which drops in like 1993 or anything like that. Obviously not Full House from 87. This is not that, where the parents are like actually parenting through the show, providing real guidance. You are just kind of there. It's Clarissa Explains It All. You see what I'm saying? It's all about her. Nobody else. Like she is in the center. She don't need parents to help her out with this. And that's a running theme with Nickelodeon. Like, trust me, I'm likely going to do a follow-up that goes into the 2000s, and I might even dig into specific shows and different videos on this channel. We'll find out. But this whole neutralizing parents was a precursor to eventually dumbing them down and then killing them off. But we ain't ready for that yet. Because in 1991, something else happened. On the cartoon side, you got two shows. You got Rugrats and you got Doug. Now, I'm going to focus on Rugrats first. It's the one that I watched the most. It ran from like 91 or so all the way up to like 2003 as far as like dropping new episodes. Doug dropped at the same time, but only ran like at least on Nickelodeon because Disney eventually bought the rights to it and used the IP. But 91 to 94-ish is when they were putting new episodes out. So we'll explain, or I'll try to break down why both kind of went two different directions. Rugrats, which I watched a whole lot. I used to think that show slaps. And I'm not saying it's bad, but fundamentally what they were trying to give kids is, again, look at the messaging. Like how they're moving the needle on certain things. Where now you have this world that revolves around talking babies. Like, yeah, you could do it. You could do talking babies on a TV show if you want to. But the babies have this elaborate life. That's how I describe it. It's really an elaborate private life that's separate from the adults, including Angelica, because Angelica can talk to the adults and she can converse with the babies. Don't really know how that works, but it is what it is. And all the different crazy plots that are playing out, a lot of it is imagination, like they're playing with a box and the box turns into a race car or whatever. Like season 1, I think on the way to season 2, season 3, as Rugrats kind of found its footing, really kind of goes off the deep end. But just look around you at even some of the adult humor in the show. Like you have the doctor, they call Dr. Lipschitz. Think about that name for a moment. And this is the person who's giving advice to the parents on how to, raise their baby. And I think there was a whole plot line, I'm going off memory here, where, he didn't have any kids. Come on, man. Like the parents are pretty, they're very out of touch because their babies just be off. They be in a whole different yard. or like off, like a dog is trying to chase them and maybe Spike gotta come save them. The whole point is the parents are so out of touch that these babies are essentially raising themselves, figuring out what is this, what is that, like running all over. Yes, Tommy is the leader. Yes, Chucky is, the scaredy cat. Phil and Lil, they just be getting into foolishness, all type of recklessness. All the babies got into the little hijinks and stuff. And then you have Angelica terrorizing them. But the key is, they create an elaborate world for children. And see, I'm a kid watching this, and it makes me think that as a child, like, it kind of moves the needle on what I would call an elaborate private life. This idea that there's a break between you and your parents, what they should know about how your life functions and what you're actually on. Like, you ain't got to tell them everything, because these babies was not telling them everything. But part of it, because for the purpose of the plot, they couldn't. But it is what it is. I think the talking babies stick, that's what I'm gonna call it, the stick, that's really what hit. Because Rugrats, they did movies, Rugrats in Paris, Chucky gets, his father marries, somebody else, and then he gets a sister, a stepsister, Kimmy, yeah, all that happened. But then you got Doug on the other end, because they both launched at the same time. And Doug just didn't hit anywhere near as hard. It's still a cartoon, but Doug is older. I guess he's like middle high school aged. He has 2 parents in the home. But remember, we've already established that Nickelodeon ain't focusing on parents. So in this case, the parents are neutralized. That's what I call it. They're not even neutralized. I'd say they're like faded all the way to the back. Like, they're there, but they ain't there. It's easier to do with cartoons and with live action. That's why you got quotes from the man who played the father in Clarissa Explains It All, who was tight about the whole situation. But regardless, Doug was considered like a gentler show. And as a result, the theory is that Doug didn't stick because the rest of what Nickelodeon was doing in this window going forward, especially like 93, 94, when Doug kind of flamed out, was way more aggressive in the cartoon space. Like, I'm about to get to that part in a moment. But like, hey, I remember Quail Man. I remember Pork Chop. I remember all that stuff. Now, I didn't really watch Ren and Stimpy. It might have been on, but for the most part, I just flipped to another channel. I was very young. But I do remember that it was on. Now, as an adult, looking back, Ren and Stimpy apparently dealt with, some clashes. Because again, it dropped in 91. But as far as like public, reception, there were some clashes because it had adult humor, it had dark humor, it had violence. Like, this is what the show had. The characters Ren and Stimpy are technically a dog and a cat, but again, it's, similar to Cat Dog, which I'm gonna get to later. Like, obviously it's a cartoon. You can kind of run all the way off the deep end with this. Aside from all the adult humor and dark humor and all that, it had a lot of shock value. If you already addressed violence, so like, these are the types of things that the show was known for. So when you got Doug next to Ren and Stimpy, what do you think the kid is gonna watch if you give him a choice? The one that's the gentler approach. Yeah, you got neutralized parents, and Doug got some stuff going on, but Ren and Stimpy it's wild. We've never seen anything like that before. Remember, keep the same energy from a show called You Can't Do That on Television. That's what Ren and Stimpy is doing. When it comes to cartoons on Nickelodeon, obviously you can get wild because with art direction, you can kind of, take things all the way off the deep end. Apparently there was even, production issues for Ren and Stimpy where I think like 1992, it's like a year into its run, standards and practices for Nickelodeon were not being upheld. So they kind of had to outsource the production of the show. So it goes to another network or like another house who's kind of producing it. So there's like a drop in quality, whatever that means. So Ren and Stimpy wasn't even Ren and Stimpy in its, truest form from that point on down. But ironically, the show still ran until 1996. And I gotta throw something else in there because in between, in 1993, you also had Rocko's Modern Life. I'm not gonna waste a whole bunch of time on Rocko. Apparently he's a wallaby and, he moves to America and he has his world that he's kind of, living in. Again, it's a cartoon, wildly off the deep end. But a lot of the same stuff people said about Ren and Stimpy is exactly what they said about Rocko's Modern Life. Adult humor, shock value, like that's what it was known for. Like I said, I ain't gonna waste my time on it. That's just what it was. Remember, this is a kid's show. It's on Nickelodeon, shop to children. Remember, I'm a 90s kid. I have access to watch this at 6, 7 years old. By that point, it's in reruns. Rocko's Modern Life turns off by 1996. Like, same year that Ren and Stimpy goes off, Rocko's Modern Life goes off. And you can kind of tell that there's gonna be a changing of the guard in terms of the TV shows once we kind of keep moving. But in between there, like I said, I ain't gonna waste much time there. Then you go to 1993, because, Rocko started in 1993. In that same time, you had Legends of the Hidden Temple. Now, Nickelodeon had a whole bunch of game shows that they tried to do. It's called Legends of the Hidden Temple. Now, the Legends part, that's one thing, like crazy tales and stories. But then when you get to Temple, what is a temple? A temple is a place of worship. So y'all got like a show about a temple, which is a place of worship. So the real question is, what are we worshiping? Now, Olmec was like this big head figure, almost like Zordon, but not. If you think of Power Rangers, I'll probably get into that some other time, but definitely not today. So when you get to, Olmec, who is, the guy who knows all the temple legends and stories, and, the big talking head, they had somebody narrating it. I don't know how much he got paid for that job. The whole point being, it's a place of worship, and they're competing in this temple. And then think about it. You fast forward, because the game always ended with a temple run, where the kids, the little, boy-girl teams, I believe it's always boy-girl teams, they eliminate each other out, and then they get to the final where you go into the temple to, run through and try to, with your pendants and try to, make all the different things. I think like the shrines and all that kind of stuff. But like, see the words, see the choices, see the imagery, because they're pushing back on something. Because when you have a temple, which is a place of worship, who are we worshiping? Because they ain't worshiping the God of the Bible. That's clear. Now, are they worshiping Olmec up in the air, kind of up for debate? But okay, I'll give an example. When you get to the Temple Run, which is likely where the game came from, like, the cell phone game Temple Run, like the end of Legend of the Hidden Temple, that final like boss level that the kids would go to, it's called the Temple Run. And when they would go in there, jump through all these rooms, one of the rooms was called the Shrine of the Silver Monkey. Let that sink in. The Shrine of the Silver Monkey. Once again, a shrine is a place where you worship something. So in this case, they're saying in that shrine, you are worshiping the Silver Monkey. Now, it's playful. You ain't got to take it that deep. I watched the show. That's not my point. But you see how they're chipping away. Like with the imagery of these shows, you're slowly chipping away at, like there's a spiritual underpinning or a spiritual undertone that takes you away from, certain ideas, certain values around, family and God and, what's right and what's wrong. Like, it's slowly being pushed. You're getting used to or accustomed, some would even say desensitized to this language. Again, temple, shrine, unnecessary. Remember, Nickelodeon had a show called Guts is not on this list. But I remember watching Guts. It was a, almost like an extreme sports show for kids. A lot of bungee cords and stuff. Like they, maybe have like a basketball, have to jump down, and the bungee cord go up real high, maybe like 12 feet and dunk the basketball. Like crazy stuff like that. Like, it was fun, and they had the aggro crag. But the thing is, Guts did not have like the spiritual component. There was no temple. There were no shrines. There were no shrines to a monkey. There was no Olmec talking to you. None of that happened. Like, this is what I'm really, kind of picking up on. Because remember, I'm watching these shows as a child. I remember I was just talking to my mom the other day. Remember, I'm a grown adult in my 30s with children. And I'm talking to her about some of these things that I saw on TV, and she's like, you didn't watch that? I'm like, yes, I did. And she's like, where was I was like, probably cooking dinner or something. The parents didn't know what their kids were watching. This was on, Nickelodeon, which is a kids program or kids network. So for the most part, if it says it's for kids, it's probably all right. At least that's the assumption. And now that I've made it all the way through all of that, see where I'm going with this. It's time to address the elephant in the room. Because all that, which technically launched in 1994, was, I guess you could argue, probably one of the most iconic shows that Nickelodeon launched. Now, it's a sketch comedy show for children. All that is a big deal for several reasons, because without all that, in theory, you don't get Keenan and Kel, you likely don't get Drake and Josh, you don't get what eventually becomes, the Amanda Show. If you don't get Drake and Josh, then we likely don't get Miranda Cosgrove, which eventually becomes, what's the show she dropped? iCarly. Like, essentially Nickelodeon, like you could say that it's like all that is almost like the center of the universe for a lot of the live action that kind of spearheads out. I'll drop in or probably talk about a lot of other things. And in this video, I'm probably going to end here. But all that is a big deal. Now, 94 till into the 2000s when it runs, did like a first show run. And then it kind of relaunched and it kept on going. I think 2005, I'm going off head here. I think that's when it like technically stopped. But all that, I think, with when you think Schnick, I think all that is like prime and center. They used to always have special guests, for music, who would, come in and sing. So, and I mean, again, they're normally doing some taping in front of live studio audiences. So there's that piece, but I think that's what the live musical guests were for. But we get to kind of get a little look in on the TV episode. But at the end of the first elephant in the room with all of that is everything that went on with the documentary Quiet on Set, and the allegations and things that have come out about how some of the actors were treated. I guess Dan Schneider related. Some of that was beyond that, like a general what they call toxic work culture. And so all of that is incredibly sad and very disappointing to hear, because as kids we're watching this and we don't understand any of what's going on in the background for obvious reason. But I think if we just focus on the on-screen part, as a sketch comedy, all that 100% was all about pushing the envelope. All about it. That's all they did. Whatever you can't do on television, they did it. At least to the end by which they thought that they could get away with it. I mean, yes, I remember Good Burger, welcome to Good Burger, home of the Good Burger, can't take your order. Like, yeah, it was funny. It was. And we celebrate, the comedy of it. But here's the thing about child actors. And so without getting into the details about, who was on the shows, whether it was Lori Beth Denberg, Danny Tamborelli, obviously the bigger name actors, the people you recognize, your Keenan and Kels, and, your Drake, your Josh, Drake Bell, all of that. Like, again, Amanda Bynes got her start there really, like, as far as, like, getting taken seriously on Nickelodeon. But if we leave the individuals out and just focus on, like, the narrative for a moment, when I consider all that, I feel like it kind of opened up Pandora's box. Because once they proved that they could essentially go wherever they wanted to and push the kids into some very uncomfortable positions, I think that's what we're kind of getting from Quiet on Set in a different way. Like, on the most basic level, the actors are being told by the adults who are writing things to portray things for comedy. And again, they're trying to give what they think kids want. But it's at the expense of the actors. Like, again, are you reflecting reality or are you dictating reality? I think that's the question when it comes to all that. With all of the craziness, if you really think, like, you don't got to ask me. If you go looking up all that sketch comedy scenes, specifically, whether it's from the 90s or what have you, you're going to see some pretty wild stuff. It's just not in the realm of reality. Forget about parents. Like that, like the parental influence, because where would children actually be if they didn't have good parents? Nobody actually believes, based on any data, that having good parents, like who are, especially two good parents in a non-conflict marriage, what they call a low-conflict marriage with two parents, your two biological parents, like that, like in theory, like, yes, there's a lot of different family structures that exist, but forget parents. That's like totally out when you get to a sketch comedy show of this nature. You can just kind of create a bunch of little pockets of randomness. And when you are a child actor, I think this is very relevant to all that, because child actors are very different from adult actors. They're in the regard that, yes, they audition and they have to get hired for jobs and all that is similar to the adults. But for the most part, you only cast a child actor for whom you think there's something in that kid that reflects the character you want them to portray. They're not like method actors that like become something new. They more or less try to keep you in the pocket. It's the reason why once you have a character that sticks in a sketch comedy show, if you think you can build a whole show around it, you just keep running with it. Like Keenan and Kel, let's take them for a moment. They played Keenan and Kel, the guys we laughed at every time we saw them. Now, they got paid for it. That's not the point. Whether it was the different sketches that we saw, repairman, man. Like, they were always the ones being laughed at. Now, we can celebrate that they were, I guess, trailblazers in terms of, young black men in comedy. And, like, that can be celebrated for what it is in theory. But, again, just using them. There's so many other actors and components to it. All that, to me, was the bomb that went off in the 90s. Once that bomb went off, again, Nickelodeon already had figured out with Are You Afraid of the Dark that they could get away with a whole lot. And they knew they could because the parents weren't really paying attention. That's how they launched Snick, because it was a whole block for kids for whom they basically assumed the parents are not paying attention. But then you get to all that, which takes that and runs with it, because they could basically just demo a bunch of craziness and see where it would go. And when they found out that it got ratings, that it hit, then they could once that bomb detonated, they could just keep on running in whatever direction they wanted. And that's exactly what happened in the back half of the 90s. I'm likely going to make a follow-up video where we get into the back half, because, hey, this is just part one. We only at 94, 95. There's so much more that I could say that I'm not going to do right now. But I think when I reflect on just whether it's Clarissa Explains It All, Rugrats, what have you, the first half of the 90s, the way I see it was a lot of it was like chipping away at the fabric of what were considered to be, societal norms in America. But they were doing it through the children. Again, if you have what some people might call an agenda, whatever, like that's the word that you might apply. Normally, you don't really worry about the parents or the grandparents. Those generations, they already know how they think and how they move. Forget them. You focus on the kids. And you may not be critically thinking as a child. We don't even know what to focus on. We don't know what is and is not important. But we just don't. But what you do is you keep chipping away, slowly and surely. Whether it's Are You Afraid of the Dark, scare you out of your minds. Or it's, Clarissa Explains It All. You know what, let's make the parent the prop. Let's not really have them offer any parenting, because kids don't really need that. Or you go to, Rugrats, elaborate private life. You got the kids doing their thing, adults over there. Adults are so out of touch that you got babies out here doing all type of randomness, getting lost everywhere, running into different yards, getting lost in the stores. Like, apparently the parents, like, they're just not in tune. And then you get to the bomb that is all that. Oh yeah, before that bomb went off, you already had adult humor, dark humor, shock value, Ren and Stimpy, Rocko's Modern Life, all of that. And when they tried to give you a cartoon that wasn't quite as wild, like Doug, it flopped. Because it just wasn't wild enough. Because they were already training us to want crazy. I remember, it's in the title, Wild and Crazy Kids. And it really wasn't all that wild, to be quite frank. I enjoyed it. Wild and Crazy Kids is where there was a race. They were doing like some type of dirt biking race. Like an actual bicycle, like a BMX bike. And I remember a kid, like, there was a crash. The kid got off his bike, picks it up, and runs past everybody, hops back on the bike, and wins the race. I remember that. Like, I don't know why, it just stands out in my mind from being a child. But all of this came to all that where that bomb goes off. And once it detonates, there's a whole bunch of shrapnel. And that is what the back half of the 90s becomes, as far as I can tell with Nickelodeon. So yes, what we watch actually matters. And it does make a difference when we do. And as far as I can tell, whatever is going on with the millennial generation right now, which is my generation as adults, a lot of those ideas started all the way back into when we were watching TV as kids, because nobody was really paying attention. But that's what you have me for, to tell you. If you actually made it all the way to the end of this video, I do have to admit that thank you doesn't do it justice anymore, because you are a real one. And if anything that I said at all actually connected with you, it is always greatly appreciated if you would please like and subscribe.